The crew is saying, let's get started. So, hello, everyone. I'm Ashley Etienne. Welcome to our Election Matters 2024 virtual event. The title of this particular event, and thank you if you joined the other ones, the title of this particular series, the art and science of polling. I know we're all anxious about the polls. We're inundated with polls all over the place. So the idea today is to get two experts on polling and research, analyzing it, producing it, et cetera, to really give us perspective on like what's real, to help us level set and really ease some of our anxiety and really sound really smart with our friends when we talk to them in the next for 2 weeks. All right, so today joining us is two seasoned pollsters, nationally recognized experts in public opinion research and campaign strategy. Simon Rosenberg and Brenda Gianiny. How about that?
Great.
Perfect. I
Excellent.
was like, I'm going to butcher your name because people butcher mine, but I'm glad I made it through that one. So Simon is not just a wonderful, energetic, smart, brilliant, bright person. He's also been on two presidential campaigns as a senior roles at the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, and the DCCC, which is Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. He's also the author of the Hopium Chronicles, a Democratic newsletter that has over 100,000 subscribers. I swear by it. Before I go on television, I read it. It's fantastic. Brenda, on the other hand, also fantastic, is new to me. Good to meet you, Brenda. I'm starting to develop new relationships with Republicans, so great to have you on.
It's good.
Brenda is the founder and the principal and the president of Axis Research, with over 2 decades of experience working with leading corporations from Walmart to Anheuser-Busch and ExxonMobil, and with Republican campaigns. She served as a primary pollster for the Bush-Cheney '04 re-election campaign. I was telling her, as a Texan, I'm practically a compassionate conservative. And she also is a pollster for Senator Mitch McConnell. So with that, guys, let's get into it. We only have 45 minutes. It's a lot of ground to cover. Everyone's anxious. You're the most important people right now in the world. So let's get into it. First, I want to start with like a very obvious one. If you don't mind demystifying for us the art and the science of polling, focus groups, other research forms, and give us a little context about how campaigns use that information, that data, and not just campaigns. I mean, you guys have also advised corporations, how corporations use it as well. So if you don't mind, Brenda, jump right into it. Tell us about your work.
Happy to. And thank you for having us on. I love being on here with Simon. I think this is exactly how Washington, D.C. is supposed to work. Even if, we have different policy objectives, like we're all supposed to get along, and that actually should make the results stronger.
Yeah.
But I love that you guys are talking polling, particularly right after lunch. It's very brave. I am happy to do it as your resident polling nerd. But I know you guys are flooded with polls. You see so many polls every day, every time you open the internet, the New York Times, the USA Today. And my biggest advice is don't look at that. I know it's not going to happen, but that really isn't what polling was created for and what Simon and I do. So we generate a ton of data for the campaigns that we work with. And like when you read the New York Times, they're going to say, okay, Harris +3, Trump +2, and they kind of move on. It's really not how campaigns or the corporations that we work with use our polls. Yes, we will look at those horse race numbers, but we're much more interested in who is moving. I think the best example of this is in 2020, and a ton has been written about it, so I'm not giving away any 2024 election secrets. During the protest of the summer of 2020, when we really started to see Hispanic voters move, the polls were the first places that we really picked up on that. And so even more than who was winning, Mark Kelly or Martha McSally in Arizona, why are we seeing this massive movement with Hispanics, and what are the issues they're moving on? And it was crime. So even more important than, okay, here's where the race is at today, we really want to see what are the dynamics underneath it, so we can say, okay, if that's your candidate, you need to have a great message on crime. Or if you're super PAC, you need to figure out how to tear the other person down and say that they're horrible on crime. But knowing that what the issues are that are driving voters, that are giving them that enthusiasm, is really point number one. And point number two is the most valuable, you guys are going to laugh because you worked on so many campaigns. The most valuable thing on the campaign is your candidate's time. Where can you see this with Harris, particularly right now? Like, she is on the road, she's flying everywhere. There's only one of her. Tim Walz is okay. Obviously, he's not drawing the crowds that she is. So as the pollster, you need to say, okay, this is where your time is most valuable that you spend. And you see sometimes they're going to crazy places. Like, you see Harris doing a ton of more rural Pennsylvania stops.
Yep.
And it can seem like if you're not looking at data, this is so counterintuitive. Like, the bulk of the voters are in Philly. Those are her voters in Pittsburgh. Why isn't she focused there? Clearly, obviously, I don't work for the Harris campaign. They're seeing in their data, like, we have an opportunity.
Their internal polling.
Their internal polling, yes,
Yeah.
is telling them some of these rural voters can be picked off. So it's worth giving our most valuable asset, her waking hours to send to these regions. So that's really how we use polls. Corporations, it's the same way. I think the best example, if anybody that works, well, I think all of you work with corporations. It's been a brutal couple of 4 years for corporations, getting sucked into political issues, be you Disney, be you Anheuser-Busch, you can, the Target, the list goes on. And so you use polling to really help navigate who are the people that really care about these issues? How do we talk about them in a way that makes our associates comfortable? How do we talk about them in a way that makes the public, our customers, our consumers comfortable? So it's really the same thing. We're not looking at how many people, like, let's say you're Walt Disney, how many people love Walt Disney or hate Walt Disney. We're looking at who are the people that are moving around and what's driving that, so we can be in front of it.
Yeah.
And I'll add just two things, because that was a great overview. One is that think of polling as when you're working for a candidate or campaign as like an insurance policy. I mean, you often know things and you have beliefs, but you're part of a tribe, and trying to win elections and build broad coalitions, you have to be able to reach people outside of your sort of place that you hang out. And so polling allows you to learn a lot about issues and candidates that and you always learn things that you didn't know, right? It's if you do a poll where you don't learn something new or something doesn't surprise you, you're not really doing it right, because it means that you're bringing your own priors right into the discussion. And the key is, it's like insurance. Like, you want to make sure that, hey, I'm going to send this candidate has got a track record in the military. How's that going to play with our voters? Or this kind of negative attack may come up. How's it going to play? And so it's always important to approach polling with a degree of humility, understanding that voters are always going to have beliefs or react to things in ways that you're not, that you are unprepared for. And that's the whole point, right? Which is that you want to be able to anticipate how things work over time in a campaign. The second thing we do a lot on the Democratic side with campaign polling is, in addition to testing sort of attributes and, backgrounds and bios and things, is we try to move people on issues. We test issues, right? We say, if the candidate is going to run on universal health care, right, or the ACA, how is that going to play? And so you do a lot of, in our polling for candidates, we do a lot of issue testing to sort of test out the big arguments we're going to make to see how they resonate with broad swatches of voters, and also with smaller groups, right? I mean, undecided, you can break it down in the crosstabs and things. You may want to, you're kind of weak with Hispanics, and let's test, what we can move with Hispanic voters. And so a lot of what was said earlier is that what is not as important, because many races that we get brought into, or pollsters get brought into, are close, right? And polling, there's a limit to the precision of polling, right? Polling can only get within 2, 3, 4 points. What you want to learn how to do is you want to learn how to grow, right? And to get more voters. That's the key of what polling really teaches you. Because I had a lunch, I'll give you an example. I had lunch with Julie Mers, who's the DCCC executive director, a few months ago, to go over all the races. We didn't talk about polling at all during the whole lunch, because every race was really close, right? And there just wasn't really, it's like 2 points, 3 points here and there. Like, the question is, how's the candidate doing? How much money they're raising, right? But what polling does is help you go from being a close race to not a close race, or if you're not close, to get closer, to understand how to go get that next tranche of voters with what arguments that will move them, as Brenda was saying earlier. And that's a lot of what our polling's about. A lot less of it is around horse race, like the stuff you see in the media polls.
And I'll say as a communicator, I've never relied on pollsters to sort of analyze a poll for me. I like to dig into the crosstabs myself and see what I can unearth about our message, the effectiveness of our message, but also where our strengths are. Like I was telling you guys earlier, I remember taking a CBS poll into the West Wing meeting with the vice president's team maybe a year ago. And I said to them, I said, look at what, she's outperforming Joe Biden with his own coalition. You guys need to double down on this. And they actually did. And so when the trigger was pulled, like she was ready to go and people were familiar with her. I mean, it was really kind of an interesting thing. But I think that's what people sort of don't realize about these polls is they really serve a lot of different, they have a lot of different utility if you're willing to dig into it and find, and sort of find those nuggets. Okay, so
You're our favorite polling consumer. Anybody that even asked for the crosstabs.
yes, I love the
I know
crosstabs.
we have to move on, but I just want to, I think Simon hit it on the head. But part of our job is to also eliminate surprises. Like
Yeah.
we should have tested for it just about any situation that could happen.
Yeah.
Interesting. We could do a whole series on testing and what you decide to test on, but we'll save that for another session because I know we can get all weedy. We can nerd out on that, but let's keep pushing forward. Okay, Brenda, you made this point. I made this point that that we're consumed with polls all over the place. One day she's up, one day he's up, one day they're down. Like it's a little all over the place. I remember being told early on in my political career that what you want to look at is the trend. The trend line is what really tells you how well folks are doing. So, based on public polling, give me your objective opinion on the state of the race.
I mean, you want to take this one first? Or?
Yeah, it's really close. And it's really close everywhere.
Shocker. Right.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean, the truth is and the way I describe polls to when I give public presentations is that the way to think of a poll is that it's like a sketch. It's not a photograph, right? Meaning that there's a level of precision that does not exist that sometimes the people in the media or polling analysts you watch on television are pushing the data beyond what they're really capable of telling you, because polls often have a 2-point, 3-point, 4-point margin of error. It means that the race is 2 points. It means you're within that margin of error. So you just know that things are really close. And that's where we are. I mean, that's where we are nationally. It's where we are in the battleground states. Everything is really close. And so there is a point where the precision of polling can't tell you much more than that. And really, what I will say, though, what's been interesting for me about the national polling since the debate is that it's actually been very consistent and steady. I mean, yes, there have been some of these kind of Republican aligned polls in the last few days that showed Trump gaining, but the lion's share of the independent polls have stayed. The race has been very stable. It's been 2 points, 3 points, 4 points for Harris. There hasn't been wide variances. It's been a little bit unusual in that regard that the race has been sort of, in my view, this stable for this long. I think we view it's, things may have shifted a half a point or a point, but it probably isn't much more than that. And when you're down at that level, like you don't know if that's just the normal bounce of polling or some kind of structural movement. So I think in this particular election, we believe things are just super close, and we just got to go fight it out in the final 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Brenda?
I agree. Like it's very close, particularly like most pollsters aren't doing a lot at nationwide. That's mainly with the media that's driving that nationwide narrative. But if you look at the battleground states, they are very close. I think we're seeing more shifts in our data. It sounds like that than Simon is. Over like the last 2 weeks, we definitely saw movement towards Trump. And it's a very Trumpy phenomena when he tends to be in the media less, more focused on his campaign, more focused on his events. Typically his numbers go up. And we definitely saw that over the last probably 2 weeks. I'd say over probably the last 6 to 7 days in some of the trending and the tracking, you're seeing that ebb away. You're seeing Harris start to gain back. It hasn't been, like I said, it's only been like 5 days. So it's not enough to call it really a trend, but it looks like, as he's getting out there more and as that narrative's getting more, he's sort of losing that advantage. But the shifts are, as Simon referenced, I mean, they're minimal. We're talking at most going from an even race to a +2, some kind of 4-point variance. So really, Ashley nailed this on her intro. It's looking at the trends. Like my first advice when you see public polls, like I even tell my mother this, like throw it away. You don't want to look at it. but I know you're going to, but look at the trends. Most of those pollsters will publish their previous polls. And so that movement is more important, like what we're talking about here. Like we saw movement towards Trump, we're seeing movement towards Harris now. Those change because every pollster, even in-house pollsters like me, it has some kind of a house effect that you will tend to favor one party over another. So I think looking at the trends and the average, both 538 and Real Clear Politics, way to get really nerdy on everybody. You can write that down. They both do averages of polling, which is better than looking at a particular poll. But if you look at any poll, even if it has a great name behind it, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and you see a shift of more 6 or 7 points over a month, unless something major happened, like a disastrous debate performance.
Or like Joe Biden drops out and Kamala Harris gets named.
You should not expect to see that. Right away, you should question that poll.
So can I just jump on that because we were talking about this beforehand? Is that
I was probably going to go there.
Yeah, I just want everyone to realize, like for the New York Times, for example, which everyone treats with great gravity, they had in August they had Harris up by 5 in Arizona, and then in September down by 5 in Arizona with no sort of external event that caused that event, and that's just not real, right? And there is the media polls, whether or not the media polls are really there to enlighten and to inform or to get clicks, we can debate all day long. But I just want everyone to realize that the media polls are operating at a degree of integrity that is lower than what would happen in a campaign. I mean, if you came to Ruben Gallego and showed him a 10-point movement in his race in a month, he would fire you in this case, right? Because there's just no possibility that actually happened.
Right. Something's wrong. Right.
Yeah, something's wrong. And so just building on what Brenda was saying is that there's the question is about motivation. When you do political polling, you're trying to win. The media polling is trying to get clicks. and it just means that there is a lower level of integrity. I mean, I'm on a little chat group with a bunch of Democratic pollsters and political people that look at all the polling all the time. And just the level of like, you got to be kidding me stuff that we see all the time in terms of constructing of the samples and the various back end stuff that makes polling have integrity, right? It's fly by night stuff. And it's also, Brenda, and maybe at some point we can talk about the challenge of response rates and how you get accurate samples. I mean, that would be something that would be interesting for you because that's another problem, is that getting accurate samples is getting more expensive and more difficult, and so therefore people aren't doing it as much as they used to because it's harder, right?
Yeah, because people say all the time, like, I've never been called for about a poll, right? Like, how can this be accurate if I've never received, a call from a pollster asking me my opinions and thoughts on things?
I have a good answer for that too, but Simon's absolutely right. Like if I was delivering some of the polls that even respected media pollsters are doing, yes, I would be fired. But the second thing is they're also not held accountable. Like my career and my company depends on me calling these races right, where those journalists are off to the next story, right? They're going to be covering, the war in Ukraine or whatever. They're not held accountable. And the third thing is we all know that the media industry is hurting. The budgets are getting smaller and smaller. As Simon referenced, polling is expensive.
Yeah.
So if you're doing sort of shoestring polling, we can't expect it to be accurate. So I could bash the media polls forever, but they make our lives very difficult because when you show your candidate, like you go into Senator McConnell's office and say, hey, I know the media is telling you that Amy McGrath is going to beat you and this race is really close and I've got you up by 15 points. They're like, who's wrong? And you're like, you've got to trust me. That's why you have internal pollsters.
Totally. Let's move on to another. I mean, let's stick to it's sort of on the same sort of thread, and that's the accuracy of the polls. Again, people freaking out. I always warn people to not overinvest in polls. I'm assuming you guys do the same thing. I think we're saying as much now because there wasn't a poll in 2016 that showed that Donald Trump was going to win, right? The polls in the midterm election showed an overwhelming, red wave in favor of Republicans. That actually didn't pan out too. So I'm curious, again, if you don't mind digging into this a little more. What is your advice to folks that are, again, freaking out about all these polls? And then secondly, have there been some adjustments in the field of polling based on the fact that there's been consistently, inaccuracies. I mean, I get that it's not an exact science, but just curious whether or not like the industry as a whole has said, like, let's take a step back and let's make some adjustments to methodology or whatever have you.
I think so. First of all, I think you just made the point. So no pollster that polls for campaigns or committees, like Simon was at the DCCC, saw a red wave coming, be on the Democrat or the Republican side. And just to let the cat out of the bag, there are no more waves coming. Like Congress has been so gerrymandered, you're not going to see 50 to 60 point swings anymore for either side. So that I think that was manufactured by the media, right? So you had some bad polls and some nationwide polls, but we know there aren't nationwide elections that were really driving that narrative. So that really underscores, like, be very careful when you're looking at these national polls, because nobody, even on the Democratic side, I have friends that are Democratic pollsters, on the Republican side was saying we're going to have this massive wave election. And this one's not going to be either. I mean, I think you're going to see a swing of at most maybe 6, 7 seats, either in Democrats or Republicans' favor. But we have gotten smarter. 2016, there also were, so we had Trump winning that. I called Wisconsin wrong. It still haunts me. But overall, so you did see people seeing Trump win, but we also learned a lot about what we were doing that was wrong. And we were doing it as well, but the media polls were really doing it. Everybody dropped landlines. I don't have a landline anymore. I guess more than 70% of the people listening to this don't have a landline anymore. Why should we call them?
Yeah.
When we really dove down and started looking at them, who has landlines? Rural households, older voters, Trump voters. So that's why a lot of those online panels, those media polls were wrong. They were completely online. They didn't have those landlines. They weren't getting that Trump voter. So we've learned that's important. And we've also learned, like, voters are really busy, particularly younger voters, and they don't like talking to people. They've grown up in an age of social media and, email. So we really need to get voters where they are. So we're doing more text to web. Yes, we can use panels sometime. Our whole life revolves around the voter file. So I hate to ever stray from voter file and all the rich information that's in there that we append to our polls. But so now we're doing more sort of an online, a text to web, if you will, component. So we are evolving and getting smarter. The other thing is, if you ever go in the crosstabs like Ashley does, you'll see this election is really driven by 2 things. It's education and gender. So we really carefully monitor our polls and make sure we're getting the right mix on race, the right mix on gender, the right mix on party. Now we're just as careful to make sure that we get education right, because people with a college education are more likely to respond to a poll than somebody that doesn't. There's a lot of reasons why. You're more likely to be working multiple jobs. You're more likely to not trust institutions, whatever it may be. You're less likely to participate in a poll. I still need you in my poll for my poll to be accurate. So we really monitor that closely. So we are always evolving, but I hate to burst anyone's bubble. Don't wait for another wave of blue or red.
Don't expect it, right? Simon, I've seen you on TV before. You're fantastic. Tell me why this might take you as a little off. I don't think this is out of your wheelhouse, but tell me if it is. Tell me why you think the race is so close. I mean, what do you think is really at play here?
Well, I just want to build quickly on 2 things that Brenda said, just to put exclamation points. A lot of what went wrong with Trump, in addition to the landlines and everything else, was people were not properly getting people without college degrees. There was a failure in understanding this sort of new emergence of the gap around education in the early days of Trump. That's been widely corrected, and particularly in the media and our side. And it's why the second thing is 538 has done an analysis of this. The average miss of national polling, media polling, in an election is between 5 and 6 points.
Oh, wow.
Average. Yeah. Meaning that this race, let's say Harris is up 2 right now. That means she could win by 7, or she could win by, or Trump could win by 3. This is the whole point about the precision issue, right? That there is just the entire country is now sitting with bated breath and lots of clicks on things that are insanely inaccurate, have a long history of inaccuracy. And then the third thing that's created volatility around the accuracy is that Republicans are now producing lots of their own polling They started this in 2022, and they often are. And one of your colleagues, Brenda, talked openly in the New York Times in a piece that I was in about the 2022 elections, about what happened with your polling and how different it was from the public polling, right? That you didn't see a red wave when the national media saw a red wave, but also the impression of the red wave was created in part by dozens and dozens of Republican-leaning polls that were put into the polling averages in 7 battleground states. And that effort has been replicated this time. I mean, there's now been more than 80 polls generated in the states and nationally by 31 different organizations are participating or dropping polls in this process. Just in the last, from Wednesday to Saturday, the Republicans dropped 10 polls into the national average, which moved the national average from 2.6 to 1.8 for Harris, which then tipped 538. It tipped Nate Silver. It tipped The Economist. And so a bunch of the averages got moved. But the national independent polling, other than those Republican polls, has not changed. There was no variance in that. I mean, we just saw the Morning Consult poll. The weekly track had no change. The Ipsos Reuters poll had no change. We'll see the Economist YouGov poll that comes out tomorrow, which had no change last week. So the national polling that was independent and not what I call this red wave polling, has not changed all that much. It's bouncing around, to your point, Brenda, within, small normal swings that happen often in elections. And so some of what's happening now, as inaccurate and difficult and as untrustworthy as this all was before, there's now this new entrant is the sort of Republican leaning polls. So why are things so close? I mean, I think that we have to recognize that I would say two things, but this is, my own view, when I answer this in presentations I give is it's really close and we just have to go win. And however we got here, we can debate after the election, right? But I'll just make a couple observations because I never actually answer this question when I get asked it. So one is that I think we have to recognize that when Joe Biden got out of the race, he was down by 3 points. And I think the Democrats failed to make the central indictment of Trump over the last 6 months, 9 months. And I think this idea that people believe things were better under Trump is, to Democrats on the face of it, an absurdity, but it's something that is a major part of what we're dealing with. And I think that Harris was always in a place where she had less time than usual to go out and make a case. And I think she's done a phenomenal job and performed at an incredible level. And the campaign is hustling. But it is going to be a close election. And I, obviously I hope we win by 2, 3, 4 points and win all 7 battleground states. But it's very likely that whoever wins, that the other candidate will win some of those other battleground states. And it's going to be really, really close in the Electoral College.
Listen, I don't need this in my life, Simon. I mean,
well, if
you can't go to Saturday. I mean, it's like my blood pressure won't stand it.
The quick happy thing for Democrats on the call is that I still think we're ahead in the national polls. I think that if you look at the Washington Post averages, we are in better shape in 270. They don't include a lot of these Republican polls. And then third is that the early vote in Michigan and Wisconsin and Nebraska, 3 of the 8 states, is like blowing it out, right? Like in a way that clearly we're doing unbelievably well and should do well. The early vote was reasonably predictive of what happened in these states in 2022, not in every case. So we feel like we're doing well. The other 5 states in the early vote, it's just a brawl. And it's super competitive but we do have clear, meaningful advantages in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Nebraska, which gets us very, very close to 270. And now we got to go, fight it out on the ground, and we have more money. We're going to be putting more ads on the air, and we've got a better grassroots operation. So the likely scenario is this thing tips to us the next 2 weeks. But as we know, in the era of Trump, anything is possible.
Brenda, what's giving Republicans some hope?
Well, I disagree with him a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
But we're still, we're still all family. But I think
we'll have beers later, right?
Exactly. I think it's actually it has been tipping to Trump's favor. Like I said, that it's starting to ebb a little bit. And I think early votes are always a nervous one to watch, right? So Democrats, you should be leading, right? Democrats should be leading pretty significantly right now. You bank your votes. Our voters like to show up on election day. One, Trump's told them there's fraud, but two, there's just something about Republicans. They like to stand in line with their neighbors. They like to get the sticker. They're just election day voters. So I think Michigan and Wisconsin are going to be really tough. I think those are I admitted right up. I called Wisconsin wrong in 2016. Still wakes me up in the middle of the night. But I think those are going to be really close elections, and I think they're going to be really tough for Harris because of the environment. There is so much voter angst out there right now. They're just unhappy, and you hear it. I took my kids out for hot dogs and chicken nuggets, and it costs $80. Why does it have to be like this? You know, they're starting to see more frustration, even on the Democratic side, about Ukraine. When is the end of this war? You're seeing a second front now in the Middle East with Hezbollah. Voters are incredibly anxious, and they're looking for change. And there is no bigger change agent in politics than Donald Trump. He wants to blow everything up. So I think that is really sort of trending things to his favor. If you're a Democrat, I think the hope is, the issue set Kamala started running on was excellent, right? She was going to talk about you. She's going to talk about abortion. She's going to talk about your family. I think she's making a colossal mistake with this pivot towards democracy. I think you saw Joe Biden do it. That is a big issue for Democrats. So if she wants to rally the base, which check, it's done, that's what she should be doing. That's not who she needs to be firing up. If you're looking at those swing voters, even those slightly conservative voters that don't like Donald Trump, his antics, his behavior makes them nervous. They're not voting on democracy. Half of them think our norms will hold, like they did in 2016. The other half already thinks democracy is broken. They see a system in Washington, quite frankly, all of us, that doesn't work for them, and they're angry. They're like, it already is broken. It's rigged against me. I can't get ahead. So I think she's making a big mistake.
That's the sentiment in both parties, right? I mean, because we've talked a little bit about issues, what has resonance and with who. I'm curious, now we're in the final home stretch. There is such a thing as a closing argument. Tell me, if you were advising Kamala Harris, what would you suggest her closing argument should be? Should it be, again, is it the economy stupid? Is it reproductive rights? Is it democracy? Tell me what you would advise. And then Brenda, I want to ask you the same question too. What would you advise her closing argument be?
Well, the campaign, I'm trying to, rather than me advise, let me try to interpret what I think they're doing,
Okay.
right?
All right.
And because I have been spending a lot of time the last couple of days trying to make sure I understood, is that they are both trying to convey a national narrative and story, and also do this kind of more micro communication. Particularly, she's been doing these events geared towards Black men and young women, and towards women in general. She's doing a big abortion speech. I think they're not doing a single closing argument. I think that they're trying to push the issues that they know are going to push their coalition, like abortion, which is a major voting issue for our coalition, for the women in the United States. And I assume that some of her closing ads will be very connected to the economy, that there'll be an economic track, right, about how, she's going to be better for the economy. They've been hitting that a little bit harder in recent days. And her overarching story that she tells, right, is this sort of soft patriotism about love of country and promise of America, and making, giving people a chance to get, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And I think a lot of that sort of structural framing is very good. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they fill in the dots there. And I think they're going to try to just bring a lot of energy. They've just announced 7 different concerts with Bruce Springsteen and other people. There's going to be sort of a real rah-rah GOTV thing to help drive our vote in the end. And then there's going to be some track indicting Trump. And they've had a long time to do a lot of research about what the closing argument against Trump should be. And I assume, this is Joe Biden's team was doing this 6 months ago before Kamala came on. So I assume there's going to be a very significant closing track. And where it seems to have been in the last few days, and perhaps effectively, Brenda, given Trump's performance over the last week and the slight movement you're seeing, is around these issues of him just being unfit and not, being able to do the job, that he's too old and wild and crazy, as opposed to an ideological argument, which has really been a lot of the basis of our stuff. But it seems like I get the sense from people I've talked to who are doing groups, Brenda, that this stuff was already popping in groups unprompted, in target groups prior to Harris really diving in on these issues around him being unfit, that this was starting to come up, that people were growing worried by seeing Trump and seeing his performance. And so I think that's going to be another way we're going to close.
Mm-hmm. Brenda, what would you advise the Trump campaign to close on in terms of issues? Well, message, I should say.
I don't think so. I also work for Jeb Bush, so I don't think the Trump campaign would listen to me. But I think clearly, like his strategy should be, how are you feeling right now? He's done a pretty effective job of trying to tie Harris to Biden. How is your life right now versus like, how do you want it? And you're right. People have this rosy, backward looking, hey, I was better off during Trump. But even that, like, he really needs to own that I'm changed. Like, I'm going to change. And you hear him. I'm going to call Vladimir Putin and I'm going to get them out of Ukraine. I'm going to get a deal with Netanyahu. I'm going to, make sure that your grocery prices aren't, increasing every time you go to the store. I'm not going to tax your tips. The list goes on, but it's how my personal life is going to change, not big policy ideals. How am I going to make it better for you and your family, make you safer, make your world a better place? And quite frankly, that's, when he's on message, that's when he communicates the best, when he's trying to talk to people one-on-one like that.
Interesting. We're running out of time. So let's just really do one last question. I'm curious, there's sort of, well, let me ask two. Let me ask one question in sort of two parts. One is early voting seems to be very high. I'm hearing from the Harris campaign that they're seeing high percentage of early vote in Georgia, North Carolina, and other places are first-time Democratic voters and sporadic Democratic voters, which they're feeling really good about. I'm curious, do we still believe, especially given that now that Trump and the Republican Party's encouraging people to vote early, that early vote is a signal and a sign of sort of what we can expect on election day in terms of results? And then the second part of the question I would love to ask you is there something that we're missing, that we're not seeing or that we're glossing over that you think will be consequential in these next 2 weeks?
Yeah, I'll do the early vote thing really quick. So Republicans are going to do better in the early vote this time than they did last time, because last time they didn't really try, and this time they're trying. And so you're actually seeing, if you use 2020 as your baseline, which is a little bit dangerous because it was such an anomalous election, which is sort of the thing we have in front of us, is you're going to see Republicans doing better. You should anticipate that Republicans are doing better. They're doing better in the national early vote than they did in 2020 at this point. And they're doing better in 5 of the states, in Georgia, North Carolina, in Arizona, Nevada, and in Pennsylvania. But in the 3 other states, we're doing much, much better than 2020, which is something, frankly, we did not anticipate. I just want to be very clear that we expected Republicans to outperform us day to day because they're trying harder, and also some of our younger vote is not going early and is going to go on election day. We know this from polling, we've seen it. And so our expectation was they would be beating us at this point in the early vote. And they are in a bunch of places, but they're not in a bunch of other places. And I shouldn't say beating, just ahead of us. And so I think we're very heartened by this sort of outperformance we're seeing in these 3 states, about the indication that shows that we've got strong organization, there's great intensity of our coalition and so on. But we see these other states as being truly battle. We are not where we want to be right now, and we got work to do. And which is why I think this is going to be a very close and competitive election. But to the point you made, yeah, I think we need a little bit more data to start getting into some of these questions about early vote. But let's just be clear. There's clear evidence the Republican Party is trying much harder. There are states where they're doing much better. Virginia, for example. I can go down a long list because I study this stuff every morning when the data comes out. But I think that I would view the early vote right now from a partisan standpoint as kind of a wash. And we also don't really know. I think it is much harder to make any broad conclusions about it than it was in previous elections, because some of the states changed their voting laws, right? I mean, it's very state specific now. Like Pennsylvania has kind of a weird early vote. And so making broad conclusions, what I'm saying to the media, and I was on MSNBC last night, is that we should be pleased with what we're seeing in those 3 states and feel like these other states, we've got work to do to get into a place that we would feel comfortable. And I view them as competitive in a battle. And what's interesting is in 2022, as we got closer to the election, the early vote got much more Democratic because young people who are more Democratic vote very late. We've started seeing a little bit of that, not too much. I don't want to jump to, because it really happened the last weekend, the coming weekend, where we started seeing young people engage. But we're doing well in an electorate, an early vote right now that's older, whiter, more rural, and more male. And so we feel good about that, right? I mean, the electorate that's showing up right now is more Republican than it was, 4 years ago. And we're still performing well in the polling. But I just think my bottom line to all of you is this is an unbelievably close election.
Yeah.
And that, we're going to find out on election day, hopefully, or the next day, right, who wins. And I think Democrats
by the weekend.
By the weekend. Democrats are, our candidate is working from joy and happiness. And I think that she's been very effective as a candidate. And I think that to me, that's the most important thing, is if she's going to lead with power and with strength and confidence and joy through these final 2 weeks, I think it will matter more than any of the ads or any of the other things that we do, because that's going to be the energy that's going to drive our coalition. And I think Democrats are feeling her, right? Yeah. We feel her strong performance. She wants it. She's working her ass off. She's traveling to 3 states yesterday. That intensity she's bringing, I think, is going to be very important for our close.
Got it. Sorry, Brenda.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. I know we're at time. I would say the big people aren't talking about the ticket splitting. We're seeing ticket splitting like I haven't seen in all my years.
Favoring who?
Favoring both. So just take the most example everyone wants to talk about people voting for Trump in Ohio and then Sherrod Brown. Is that going to happen in Montana? Vote for Tester. But you're seeing it on both sides in Pennsylvania. You have a lot of, I'm going to vote for Trump, these rural voters. He's my guy, but I feel kind of bad about it, so I'm going to vote for Casey. And then in the suburbs, Bucks, Montgomery County, you have a lot of women saying, I'm going to vote for Harris. I really, really like her, but I don't like Casey. I'm going to vote for McCormick. So you're seeing it on both sides.
You're making us more anxious.
Yeah.
Make sure you go vote.
It's harder to predict anything. Right. Exercise the anxiety out by voting. All right. Yes. Thank you, guys. Brilliant conversation. Have a lot of respect for both of you. It's, again, really great. We're all waiting on bated breath, fingers crossed that this whole thing works out and that there is no violence and that we can move on, day after election day and try to come back together as one nation and move forward together. So thank you. With that,
we'll sign
off. All right.